A glamorous private jet, a night of luxury in the sky, when a mistress suddenly reaches out and yanks the hair of a pregnant wife, humiliating her in front of everyone. The husband takes the mistress's side, convinced no one can stop him, but what he does not know is that his own billionaire brother is on board. What unfolds next is not just betrayal, it is a brutal clash of arrogance, truth, and unstoppable justice. And trust me, you will not believe how this flight ends until we dive in. Tell us the time you are watching and where you are tuning in from, and leave a comment below so we can hear from you. The low hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady vibration that normally lulled passengers into calm. Tonight it felt different. The private jet shimmered with luxury, from the leather seats polished to perfection to the chilled bottles of champagne waiting in silver buckets. A faint fragrance of expensive perfume lingered in the air, mixed with the subtle tang of aviation fuel that clung to every flight. The scene should have been elegant and quiet. Instead, it was about to erupt. She sat near the window, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The pregnant wife wore a silk maternity dress in pale blue, chosen carefully for comfort but still glowing under the cabin lights. Her eyes flicked between the glass of sparkling water in her hand and the reflection of her husband laughing too loudly with the woman beside him. That woman, the mistress. Blonde curls, a crimson dress, and a smirk that seemed painted on her face. For the past hour, whispers had rippled through the jet. A few business associates of her husband tried to bury themselves in their laptops, pretending not to notice. A pair of flight attendants exchanged glances at the tension building row by row. The pregnant wife sat stiffly, her heart pounding, her throat tight. Every word the mistress uttered was aimed like a dagger, meant to humiliate her in front of the small audience trapped in this flying palace. Then, without warning, the moment came. The mistress leaned forward, her manicured hand reaching out. She grabbed a fistful of the wife's long dark hair and yanked hard, so hard that the wife gasped aloud. The sound cut through the steady drone of the engines like a scream in a cathedral. Her head snapped to the side, pain shooting down her neck. Her glass slipped from her fingers, spilling water down her lap. Every eye turned instantly. The cabin froze. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The clink of ice in a champagne glass stopped mid-motion. A businessman dropped his pen, and it rolled loudly across the floor, echoing louder than it should have in the sudden silence. The mistress smiled coldly, still clutching that handful of hair. "Do you really think you belong here?" Her voice dripped with contempt, sharp enough to slice through the air. The wife struggled to pull back, one hand on her belly, her lips trembling. She could not cry out too loudly. She knew every sudden jolt might disturb the fragile heartbeat she carried inside her. Her eyes watered with pain, but she pressed her lips together to hold back the sob. For a long second, no one moved. The husband did not rise to protect her. He sat back with his arm slung lazily on the armrest, as if enjoying the show. His cold indifference was even more cutting than the mistress's grip. The wife's vision blurred with tears. She could see the reflection of herself in the polished window, hair pulled, body bent, dignity stripped in front of everyone. Shame burned in her chest. The world outside the jet was endless night, stars scattered like indifferent witnesses. Inside, the humiliation blazed bright under artificial lights. A flight attendant finally took a nervous step forward, but she hesitated. The mistress gave a sharp tug, forcing the wife's head lower, before releasing her abruptly. The wife slumped back against the seat, her breathing ragged, her cheeks streaked with tears. The silence that followed was not calm. It was charged, heavy, vibrating with unspoken judgment. Cameras glinted. One passenger quietly raised a phone, capturing the scene in shaky hands. The red recording light blinked, proof that the assault had not gone unseen. The wife shut her eyes, her heart hammering. The world seemed to tilt, the plane itself trembling slightly in turbulence. And in that moment, as her dignity seemed lost and her strength nearly broken, a new presence stirred at the back of the cabin. What no one knew yet was that 27 minutes earlier, the course of this flight had already shifted. The cabin was heavy with tension. The air no longer carried the soft hum of wealth and leisure. Instead, it was thick with disbelief. Moments ago, laughter and polite conversation had drifted between the rows of seats. Now, everything was shattered. The mistress sat back in her chair with a satisfied smile, her red lips curled in triumph. The pregnant wife clutched her belly and tried to steady her breathing. Her body shook as she pressed trembling fingers to her scalp where the hair had been yanked. The strands still tingled from the brutal pull. Her skin stung where tears of humiliation had cut hot paths down her cheeks. She blinked hard, but her eyes blurred again, vision swimming with salt and shame. Her silk dress was damp from the spilled glass of water. Dark patches spread across the pale blue fabric, making her look as if she had been marked in front of them all. The passengers did not know what to do. A middle-aged man in a suit adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, but the sound came out too loud and awkward. A woman in pearls pulled her handbag close, as if the violence might leap from one row to another. One of the flight attendants moved quickly to fetch a towel, her hands trembling so badly that the fabric slipped to the floor. The only sound was the gentle hum of the engines, and then, faintly, the soft ping of ice settling in a forgotten glass. The wife lifted her head. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, smudging into dark rivers against her pale skin. Her lips trembled, but she did not speak. The silence that followed her suffering was more cutting than the attack itself. Her gaze moved from face to face, searching for a shred of sympathy, a whisper of compassion. Some guests looked away, ashamed, while others stared openly, as if unable to process what they had just seen. Then came the whispers. Quiet at first, almost like a rustle of fabric, then louder as courage grew. Did she just pull her hair? My God, she is pregnant. He is just sitting there doing nothing. The murmurs swelled into a storm of judgment circling the cabin. Heads shook. Phones rose higher, catching shaky footage in the glow of the cabin lights. A few passengers covered their mouths, stunned that such cruelty could unfold in a space so confined, so public. The wife tried to stand. Her knees buckled, her body still weakened by shock, and she sank back into her seat. Her hand pressed hard against her stomach, protecting the child inside from the chaos outside. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, trailing down to her chin before falling silently onto the dress. She whispered under her breath, almost too soft to hear, "Please, let my baby be safe." In the far corner of the cabin, a champagne flute slipped from a nervous hand. It fell to the carpet and shattered into glittering fragments. The sharp crack of glass snapping apart cut through the silence like lightning in a storm. Gasps echoed, quick and horrified. A woman clutched her pearls tighter, and another passenger pressed a hand to his mouth. The sound made everything real. It was no longer a scene that could be ignored. The mistress laughed lightly, brushing a golden curl from her face. She leaned back, crossing her legs, the crimson fabric of her dress gleaming under the overhead lights. Her arrogance filled the cabin, daring anyone to challenge her. The wife sat frozen, her body curled in on itself. She stared at the floor where the glass had broken, shards scattered like the pieces of her pride. For a moment, she felt as fragile as those shards, ready to be crushed under careless footsteps. Yet deep within, under the ache and humiliation, something stirred. It was not strength yet, it was not defiance, but it was the beginning of a spark that refused to be extinguished. The cameras kept rolling, red lights blinking quietly in the corners of the cabin. And though the husband had not yet moved to her side, the world outside this jet would soon see everything. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, until at last the husband leaned forward. His expression was not one of concern for his pregnant wife. Instead, it was laced with irritation, as though her pain was an inconvenience to him. He looked around at the cabin, at the passengers whispering, and the cameras blinking, and he raised his voice. "Everyone calm down," he said, forcing a chuckle that rang hollow in the tense air. "You are making this into something it is not." The wife's eyes widened. She pressed her hand tighter against her belly, the sting of betrayal burning hotter than the pain in her scalp. She searched his face for any sign of compassion, any flicker of the man she thought she had married. But his gaze slid past her, settling on the mistress who sat smugly with arms crossed, lips curled in satisfaction. "She overreacted," he continued, nodding toward his wife. "Pregnancy makes women sensitive. Hormones, stress, you know how it is." His tone was condescending, as if he were lecturing the passengers rather than defending his spouse. A murmur spread through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." A woman clutched her handbag tighter, disgust flashing across her face. Yet the husband carried on, oblivious or unwilling to notice. The wife's breath caught. She whispered, "How can you say that after what she did to me?" Her voice was small, trembling, but it carried enough for those nearby to hear. The husband turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Do not make a scene," he snapped. "You embarrassed yourself enough already." Gasps rippled through the cabin once more. A young passenger at the back raised her phone higher, capturing every word. The red recording light blinked steadily, a silent witness to his cruelty. The mistress shifted, pretending to feign innocence. She leaned against him, her hand resting on his arm in a display of intimacy. "She always twists things," she said loudly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You all saw it. She provoked me." The passengers looked at one another, disbelief etched on their faces. No one had seen provocation. They had seen a pregnant woman assaulted in plain sight. But the mistress, emboldened by the husband's protection, wore her arrogance like armor. The wife sat trembling, her hands folded over her belly. She wanted to speak, to shout the truth, but her throat closed tight. Her husband's words echoed in her ears. Sensitive. Hormones. Overreacting. Each word chipped away at her dignity. The husband lifted his chin, scanning the cabin with an air of authority. "I will not have this turned into a spectacle," he declared. "We are fine. My wife is fine. She should be grateful she has me to handle situations like this." The passengers did not respond. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable. Others stared at him in open disbelief. A businessman whispered under his breath, "He is protecting the wrong person." The flight attendant who had dropped the towel earlier bent to pick it up, her hands still shaking. She approached the wife quietly, placing the cloth in her lap with a look of silent sympathy. It was a small gesture, but the wife felt it like a lifeline. Someone, at least, saw her suffering. Her husband ignored it. He reclined in his seat, pulling the mistress closer. She rested her head on his shoulder, flashing a victorious smile toward the rows of passengers who now served as unwilling witnesses. The wife sat in silence, her cheeks streaked with tears, her body heavy with exhaustion. Yet deep inside, beyond the shame and despair, another feeling began to rise. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. The growing awareness that she was completely alone in her marriage, that the man beside her had chosen cruelty over compassion, and that this truth would change everything. The cameras kept rolling, recording every smirk, every careless word. Outside the sealed cabin of the jet, the world waited. And soon enough, they would all see the man who defended the mistress while abandoning his wife. The jet soared smoothly through the night sky, but inside the cabin the atmosphere was anything but calm. The husband had already made his choice, standing firmly on the side of the woman who had just humiliated his pregnant wife. Now the mistress leaned forward, her body language radiating triumph. She crossed her legs slowly, letting the crimson fabric of her dress shimmer under the cabin lights, and looked directly at the passengers who dared to watch. Her lips curled into a smile that was both sharp and mocking. "You all saw it," she said in a voice loud enough to fill the cabin. "He is with me, not with her." She tilted her chin toward the pregnant wife, as if dismissing her entirely. The words sliced the silence, leaving the wife trembling in her seat. The mistress lifted her hand and twisted her wrist with deliberate slowness. A diamond ring sparkled under the lights, larger than anything the wife had ever worn. She held it up for everyone to see, catching the glow so that it glittered like a weapon. "Do you know who gave me this?" she asked, pausing only long enough to let the tension build. "It was him. He promised me everything, and unlike her, I know how to keep his attention." Gasps rippled across the cabin. A few passengers whispered to one another in disbelief. Others shook their heads, disgust etched on their faces. Still, the mistress basked in their reactions, mistaking shock for admiration. She leaned closer to the husband, brushing her shoulder against his, her smile widening as though she had just claimed her territory in front of the world. The wife's hands trembled in her lap. She pulled at the damp fabric of her dress, trying to smooth it, trying to hold on to a shred of dignity. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let more tears fall. Every word from the mistress was a blade, but the sting of silence from her husband cut even deeper. The mistress was not finished. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out her phone. With a flick of her finger, she opened a gallery of photographs and turned the screen outward so nearby passengers could see. The images glowed with scenes of intimate vacations, dinners under candlelight, luxury trips that should have belonged to a wife but had been stolen by another. "Look at this," she said proudly. "He and I in Paris. He and I in Santorini. He and I at the villa in Italy. Do you think he would take her anywhere like this?" The wife closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Her stomach tightened with fear and grief. She whispered silently to the child within her, a plea for strength, for protection, for survival through this storm of shame. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man near the aisle muttered, "This is cruel." A woman next to him nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. The mistress heard, but instead of softening, she laughed, a high, sharp sound that rang like broken glass. Cruel? No. This is reality. Men choose women who make them feel alive. That is why he chose me. The husband said nothing. He let her words hang in the air, his silence working as a confirmation. The passengers looked at him, waiting for denial, waiting for a shred of decency, but he only adjusted his cufflinks as if nothing important had been said. The wife lowered her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "You are humiliating me." But her words were drowned in the mistress's laughter. Phones continued to rise, recording every moment. The blinking red lights captured the arrogance, the cruelty, and the betrayal with perfect clarity. The mistress basked in the attention, unaware that the very evidence she flaunted would soon be her downfall. In that cabin high above the clouds, the mistress thought she was untouchable. She thought she had won, but she did not yet know who else was watching, who else was listening, and how quickly the tide was about to turn. The mistress's arrogant laughter still echoed through the cabin when the husband finally shifted in his seat. His face was flushed, not with shame, but with irritation at the murmurs spreading around them. He could hear the passengers whispering, could see their disapproving stares, and it pricked his pride like needles. He sat up straighter, squared his shoulders, and raised his voice to reclaim control of the room. "That is enough," he snapped. His voice carried the weight of command, the same tone he used in boardrooms when silencing subordinates. He scanned the rows of seats, daring anyone to challenge him. "What you saw was a private matter, nothing more, and if anyone here thinks they can interfere, they will regret it." The passengers stiffened. A few lowered their phones, afraid of drawing attention, but others kept recording quietly, their hands steady despite his threats. The wife sat frozen, clutching her belly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She had lived with that tone before, the cold voice that stripped her of confidence. Hearing it now, in front of strangers, left her trembling. Still, she remained silent, unwilling to provoke him further in such a vulnerable state. The husband turned his gaze toward her, his eyes narrowing into slits. "And you," he said with venom, "do not dare to play the victim. You know better than anyone that I hold your future in my hands. One call from me, and your accounts are frozen. Your cards will stop working. You and your unborn child will have nothing." Gasps rippled across the cabin. A woman at the back shook her head in disbelief, whispering to the man beside her, "How can he speak to her like that?" The man only muttered, "He is drunk on his own power." The mistress leaned closer to him, smirking as though the cruelty pleased her. She whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Let her cry. She has no idea how replaceable she really is." The wife flinched. Her lips trembled as though she might speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She pressed her palm harder against her stomach, feeling the reassuring rhythm of life inside her, grounding her against the storm of humiliation. The husband raised a hand, gesturing at the flight attendants. "If she continues this nonsense, I will have her escorted to the back of the plane. She will sit alone until we land." His words cracked like a whip. The attendants froze, caught between duty to him and compassion for the wife. Their eyes betrayed discomfort, but their bodies remained stiff, waiting for direction. The passengers, however, were no longer silent. A few voices rose in protest. "She is pregnant," one man said firmly. "You cannot treat her like this," a woman added. "This is abuse, plain and simple." The husband's face reddened with anger. He pointed a finger toward them, his voice booming. "Keep your opinions to yourselves. None of you know who you are dealing with. I own companies that could crush your livelihoods overnight. You think your little recordings will matter? I can buy silence. I can erase stories. I have friends in every corner of the media. One call, and this entire scene disappears." The mistress laughed again, leaning against him as if his threats were proof of his strength. She raised her glass of champagne in a mock toast to the stunned passengers. The wife closed her eyes. Each word was like another chain tightening around her, but deep inside, something shifted. The humiliation was unbearable, yet it was also clarifying. She understood now, fully and painfully, that his love had never been protection. It had always been possession. The passengers exchanged glances. Phones remained lifted, their silent red lights blinking, capturing every vile threat. The husband believed his power stretched into the skies, but he did not realize that his arrogance had already sealed his downfall. And in that fragile silence after his tirade, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for a force greater than his cruelty to finally break through. The air inside the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. The passengers sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the husband, the mistress, and the trembling wife. The husband's threat still echoed, but it was the mistress who struck next. She leaned forward, her eyes glinting with malicious delight, and decided that mere words were no longer enough. With a sudden flick of her wrist, the mistress grabbed the glass of champagne from the table and hurled it at the wife. The golden liquid splashed across the pregnant woman's face and chest, soaking into the pale blue silk of her dress. Droplets rolled down her skin, mingling with the tears that had not yet dried. The shock of the cold drink made her gasp, clutching her stomach instinctively. A collective cry of outrage erupted from the passengers. "Enough," one woman shouted. "She is pregnant." Another voice rang out. "Someone stop this." Phones rose higher, cameras capturing the cruelty in sharp detail. The wife sat motionless for a moment, stunned by the assault. Her wet dress clung tightly to her body, highlighting the curve of her belly, the life she carried within. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but her spirit fought to remain upright. She raised trembling hands to wipe her face, her eyes filled with a mixture of despair and determination. The mistress smiled proudly, as though she had won a prize. She turned to the husband and purred. "She looks pathetic. Admit it. You never should have married her." Her voice carried across the cabin, cruelly deliberate, designed to slice through whatever dignity his wife still held. The husband did not scold her. He did not move to help. He simply nodded, his lips twisting into a smirk. "She was never strong enough," he muttered, loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. "Always weak, always clinging." Gasps spread again, sharper this time, mixed with murmurs of disgust. A man near the aisle whispered angrily, "This is beyond shameful." His wife nodded, holding her phone steady as the recording continued. The pregnant wife finally found her voice. It was shaky at first, fragile from hours of silence, but it rose above the noise. "You are humiliating me in front of everyone," she cried. "And for what? To protect a woman who despises me, who despises the child I carry." Her words cracked the cabin like thunder. The passengers leaned in closer, their faces etched with sympathy and fury. The mistress only laughed, a high, cruel sound that bounced against the polished walls of the jet. "You humiliate yourself," she spat. "You were never enough for him. You never will be." The wife's shoulders shook. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Her voice trembled again, but there was strength in the tremor. "You may strip me of dignity tonight, but you cannot erase who I am, and you cannot erase the truth." The cabin went still. For the first time, the mistress faltered. Her smile wavered, uncertain beneath the weight of those words. The husband shifted uncomfortably, his smirk cracking as he noticed the red recording lights blinking from multiple angles, capturing every word, every sneer, every cruel laugh. One passenger, unable to stay silent any longer, stood and shouted, "This is abuse. We will not let this be hidden." Others nodded, some clapping softly in solidarity with the wife. The tide in the cabin was turning. The wife sat back, soaked and trembling, but her eyes no longer carried only shame. They carried fire. The humiliation had been unbearable, but it had also drawn a line. And as the cameras continued to capture the scene, that line was now visible to the world. The mistress, unaware of how close her arrogance had brought her to ruin, leaned back with another smug smile. She thought she had broken her rival completely. What she did not know was that her cruelty had awakened a storm that would soon sweep through the entire cabin. The cabin was still vibrating with tension when the wife slowly rose from her seat. Her body shook from the weight of humiliation, her dress clung wet to her frame, and her hair was tangled from the earlier assault. Yet as she stood, something shifted. The weakness the mistress had mocked and the husband had scorned began to fall away, replaced by a quiet strength that startled even herself. Her knees wobbled, but she steadied them. She pressed one hand firmly on the armrest for balance, the other over her swollen belly. The child within her was her anchor. The humiliation had nearly broken her, but the life she carried reminded her that surrender was no longer an option. The mistress scoffed. "Look at her. She cannot even stand without shaking." Her voice was mocking, full of venom, but the wife did not shrink this time. She lifted her head, and her eyes, though red with tears, burned with a new fire. "No more," the wife said firmly. Her voice was louder than before, strong enough to carry to the back of the cabin. Every head turned. The passengers leaned forward, holding their breath. For the first time that night, the sound of defiance rang out from her lips. The husband frowned, clearly irritated. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself further," he ordered. But she did not obey. Her chest heaved, her heart pounded, but she stood taller. "You have humiliated me long enough," she declared. "You both have treated me as if I am invisible, as if my pain does not matter. But I am not invisible, and I will not be silenced." Gasps broke through the cabin. The mistress's smirk faltered. She leaned toward the husband, whispering urgently, "Make her stop." But he was frozen, caught off guard by the sudden surge of strength in the woman he had dismissed as weak. The wife's hands trembled, but she raised one to point directly at them. "You think I am powerless," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But power is not in cruelty. Power is not in money or arrogance. Power is in truth, and the truth is shining on you right now." Dozens of phones lifted higher. The passengers knew they were witnessing a moment that could not be ignored. Some nodded in agreement, whispering encouragement. One woman near the front whispered, "Good for her." Another man murmured, "Finally, she is fighting back." The mistress slammed her glass onto the table, her face twisted with rage. "You pathetic little woman," she spat. "Do you really think anyone cares what you say?" The wife met her glare without flinching. "They will care," she replied, "because they have seen everything. They have heard everything. You cannot erase the truth. Not tonight." Her words reverberated through the cabin. The husband opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. His authority, once unshakable, was crumbling in front of everyone. The mistress's arrogance wavered, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her dress. The wife drew a deep breath. Her hands still shook, but her eyes were steady. "I may have been silent before," she said, her voice resonant now, almost commanding. "But silence ends here. Enough is enough." "Mo." The cabin erupted in quiet applause. It began with one passenger, then another, until a soft ripple of clapping filled the air. The wife stood, her cheeks still wet with tears, her body trembling from exhaustion, but she had reclaimed something vital, her voice, her dignity. The mistress stared, stunned, her mouth opening but no words coming out. The husband clenched his jaw, his pride collapsing under the weight of witnesses and evidence. The shift was unmistakable. The tide had turned. And for the first time since the nightmare began, the wife no longer looked like a victim. She looked like a woman who had decided to fight. The jet's cabin was still ringing with the wife's declaration when the door at the rear creaked open. The sound was soft, almost drowned out by the hum of the engines, yet it carried enough weight to draw every eye in the room. The passengers turned as one, their phones still raised, their breath caught in anticipation. From the back stepped a man who seemed to fill the narrow aisle with his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit clinging neatly to his frame. The low light gleamed against his silver cufflinks, subtle markers of wealth that carried a gravitas no one could ignore. His steps were calm, measured, unhurried, but every stride carried authority. The mistress froze. Her smug smile faltered for the first time. She whispered to the husband, "Who is that?" Her voice, once sharp with arrogance, was now edged with unease. The husband turned, his face paling as recognition dawned. He tried to mask it with irritation, but the sweat beating at his temples betrayed him. "You should not be here," he muttered, his voice too low, too brittle to hold power. The man stopped halfway down the aisle, his eyes scanning the scene. His gaze lingered on the wife, drenched and trembling but standing tall. He nodded at her, a silent gesture of respect and acknowledgement. Then his eyes shifted toward the husband and the mistress. His stare was cold, unyielding, the kind that could strip a person of every ounce of false bravado. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said at last, his voice deep and steady, carrying effortlessly over the cabin. "Forgive the interruption. I could no longer sit by and watch this charade continue." The passengers leaned forward, captivated. Phones zoomed in, red lights blinking furiously to capture every second. He turned his gaze squarely on the husband. "You have forgotten yourself," he said calmly. "You think power is measured in money, in threats, in how loudly you can silence others. But real power does not cower behind cruelty. Real power stands in defense of those who cannot be heard." The husband shifted uncomfortably. His smirk was gone, his hands fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. The mistress grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, "Say something. Do not let him take control." But her own voice quivered. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black wallet. With a practiced flick, he opened it, revealing identification that gleamed under the cabin lights. The passengers craned their necks, gasping as they caught sight of the emblem. "My name is Alexander Whitmore," he announced. "Billionaire, founder of Whitmore Industries, and brother to the woman you have tried to break tonight." His voice cut like steel. "She is not alone. She never was. And now the world will know the truth." The cabin erupted in whispers. Some passengers clapped quietly, while others shook their heads in awe. Phones zoomed closer, recording every word as evidence. The mistress's face drained of color. "No, this cannot be happening," she muttered, clutching the husband's sleeve. But the husband looked even worse. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came out. His jaw hung slack, his confidence shattered. Alexander's gaze swept across the cabin once more. "You wanted witnesses," he said. "Now you have them. And I assure you, the world beyond this jet will see everything. The cruelty, the arrogance, the betrayal. It is over." The wife's lips parted in disbelief. Relief washed over her face, mingling with exhaustion and the faint flicker of hope. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer standing alone against her tormentors. The cameras continued to roll. The balance of power had shifted. The storm that began with humiliation had reached the moment of reckoning, and the billionaire brother's presence had turned the tide completely. The moment Alexander revealed his identity, the cabin's atmosphere shifted completely. What had once been a theater of humiliation was now a courtroom in the sky. The billionaire brother's words still echoed through the narrow space, and the passengers' eyes burned with judgment. Phones stayed raised, recording, capturing every angle of the collapse that was about to unfold. The husband tried to speak. His mouth opened, but the words stumbled and died before leaving his throat. He coughed, cleared his voice, then tried again. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. But his once powerful voice now cracked, thin and unconvincing. Sweat rolled down his temples, soaking into his collar. He tugged at his tie as if it were strangling him. The mistress clung to his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Do not let him do this," she whispered harshly. "Tell them he is lying. Tell them this is all staged." But her own voice trembled, betraying her fear. Alexander stood firm, his gaze steady, his tone calm yet merciless. "Lying? You think I need to fabricate anything?" He gestured toward the blinking phones held by nearly every passenger. "Your cruelty is already documented. Every insult, every act of violence, every arrogant laugh. You destroyed yourselves the moment you believed no one would hold you accountable." The passengers murmured in agreement. A woman near the aisle said loudly, "We saw everything." Another added, "The world is going to see this." Their words piled onto the husband's shoulders, crushing the last remnants of his pride. The wife sank back into her seat, exhausted but no longer broken. Relief mixed with vindication spread across her face. For the first time that night, she was not the one shrinking. She was the one being defended. The power had shifted, and she felt it in her bones. The husband's face twisted with desperation. He turned toward the passengers, raising his hands as if to beg. "You do not understand. This is my private life. None of this should concern you." But his plea was drowned out by the steady click of cameras, the glow of screens recording his downfall. The mistress broke next. Her facade of confidence shattered like glass. She clutched her diamond ring, waving it wildly. "He loves me," she shouted. "He chose me. You cannot take that away." Her words rang hollow, laced with panic. She looked around frantically for support, but every gaze she met was cold, unsympathetic. One passenger, a businessman who had remained quiet until now, stood and said firmly, "Love does not look like what we saw tonight. Love does not humiliate a pregnant woman. Love does not stand silent while cruelty takes place." His words struck hard. Applause rippled through the cabin, soft at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the air. The husband shrank under the noise, his shoulders slumping. His hand slipped from the mistress's grasp. He lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The mistress shook him by the arm, frantic. "Say something. Do something." But he only sat back, mute, broken, stripped of the authority he once wore like armor. Tears spilled down the mistress's cheeks. She wiped at them furiously, smearing her makeup into dark streaks. "This is not fair," she cried. "You cannot do this to me." But the truth was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming, and fairness was no longer hers to claim. Alexander's voice cut through their collapse like a blade. "What you called love was nothing more than cruelty and greed, and now it ends." His words silenced the mistress's sobs and left the husband trembling in shame. The passengers lowered their phones but not their judgmental eyes. They had seen enough. The trial had played out in real time, and the verdict was clear. In that cabin, high above the clouds, the husband and mistress were no longer figures of arrogance and power. They were exposed, fragile, and defeated, and for the first time, it was they who trembled under the gaze of others. The jet descended steadily toward the glowing lights of the city below, but inside the cabin, the true landing had already taken place. The power that once belonged to the husband and his mistress was gone, stripped away in front of dozens of witnesses. The billionaire brother's presence had shifted everything, and the wife now sat not as a victim but as a woman who had endured and reclaimed her dignity. The passengers continued to murmur, their phones still recording, their eyes still fixed on the couple who had fallen from arrogance into disgrace. The mistress sat slumped in her chair, her makeup smeared, her eyes red and wild. The diamond ring she had flaunted so proudly, minutes earlier, no longer glittered like a prize. It now looked gaudy, meaningless, a symbol of betrayal rather than triumph. She tried to speak, but only sobs came, broken and sharp, echoing like the cries of someone who had finally realized the game was lost. The husband looked even worse. His once confident posture had crumbled. He sat hunched, his face pale, his hands clasped together as though begging silently for the storm to pass. His tie hung loose, his shirt damp with sweat. He was no longer a commanding figure, but a hollow shell, exposed and condemned by his own actions. The wife breathed slowly, each inhale steadier than the last. The humiliation still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She placed her hand gently on her belly and whispered, "We made it. We are safe now." Her words were meant for the child within, but everyone nearby could feel the weight of her victory. When the jet touched down, the final act began. The door opened, and the flashing lights of cameras flooded the cabin. Reporters had been alerted, perhaps by passengers who sent footage before the plane even landed. Microphones extended, voices shouted questions, and the night erupted with the sound of truth rushing into the world. Airport security and local police stepped inside. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one officer said firmly to the husband. His face blanched. He tried to protest, but the words fell flat. The cameras caught every twitch of his mouth, every bead of sweat. There was no escape. Two officers guided him out of the cabin while reporters shouted, "Do you have anything to say about the assault? Did you really defend your mistress over your wife?" His silence was deafening. The mistress followed, escorted out under the blaze of flashing cameras. Her tears streaked down her cheeks, but no one offered sympathy. The crowd outside booed, their outrage loud and unrestrained. She tried to cover her face, but the cameras captured everything. Her arrogance had collapsed into nothing more than shame. The wife stepped out last, supported gently by Alexander. The billionaire placed a steady hand on her shoulder as the cameras turned toward her. Reporters shouted questions, but the flashing lights revealed not a broken woman, but a survivor. Her soaked dress clung to her body. Her hair was still damp, but her eyes shone with quiet strength. She lifted her chin and spoke clearly, her voice calm yet resonant. "What happened tonight was cruel, but cruelty cannot silence the truth. The truth always comes out, and tonight it has." Her words rippled through the crowd, carried by microphones, broadcast across screens. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew louder, until the night air shook with support. Alexander guided her past the chaos toward a waiting car. As the door closed, she glanced once more at the sea of cameras. She no longer felt trapped. She felt free. The chains of silence were gone. The final image was not of the husband in disgrace or the mistress in tears. It was of the wife resting her hand on her belly, whispering softly to her child, "We are free." The headlights of the car cut through the night as it drove away, leaving behind the broken remnants of arrogance and cruelty. And in that moment, the message was clear. No power, no wealth, no arrogance can bury the truth forever.